Well, welcome everybody to our class tonight on Romans. We'll be in Romans chapter 1, verse 18 in just a moment, 18, 19. You will be surprised at what I propose to do tonight. It's taken us 6 or 7 or 8 weeks to get through the first 18 verses of Romans, and we're going to finish the whole chapter in one lesson tonight. And at least that's my intention. So we'll run through some of this pretty quickly. Last week we talked about, the last couple of weeks, we talked about the gospel. We talked about the gospel as the power of God, the righteousness of God, and the wrath of God. And so Paul goes into a very lengthy discussion about the need for the wrath of God. And it takes all of the rest of chapter 1, all of chapter 2, and half of chapter 3 before he ends this discussion. I would propose we take chapter 1 tonight. Chapter 2 we'll take about 2 weeks on. And then the first half of chapter 3 we'll take 1 week on. So 4 weeks is my proposal for dealing with these verses. They are not pleasant to deal with because it's dealing with the negative side of the gospel. And that is, it's dealing with the part of the gospel, or actually it's dealing with the need for the gospel. The need for the gospel is, and it finally gets to the point in the middle of chapter 3, where it says there, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So for the next 4 weeks, that's what we're going to be talking about. All have sinned and have come short of the glory of God. That's why the gospel or the good news is necessary, because of the sinfulness of all of mankind. So I'd like to just read. We're just going to read, beginning with verse 18. We're going to read the rest of the chapter all the way through. So if you have your Bibles, you want to turn to that, or just look at the screen that we have for you. Romans 1, 18 through the end of the chapter. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, divine nature, they've been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. They exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. Therefore God gave them over in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions, for their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. And in the same way, also the men abandoned the natural function of the woman and burned in their desire toward one another. Men with men committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. Just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful. And although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who practice them. So that is the picture Paul provides for us. The picture of the world, really, this is the picture of the world from beginning to current and into the future, the picture of all the world without Jesus Christ. If God had not sent his son into the world, if the good news or the gospel had not been made available to the world, this is the picture that we live with. And in fact, it's the picture that we die with. There is no hope. There's no help. There is no hope. We are not able, as human beings, to save ourselves. We are not able to do what is right. Even in doing right, there maybe often is improper motives for doing the right thing. We do the right thing for the wrong reasons. We are simply imperfect. Now, before we go further into our discussion tonight, I would like to say in some way, and again, this is something you might want to disagree with, but it's something that I have kind of come up to the conclusion about, and that is, I think all sins, and he certainly names a whole lot of sins in the reading that we just had, a lot of individual different sins, but all sins can be boiled down, or at least find a source in one sin. The one sin that every human being has created. And what I want to, the picture that I want to try to describe here is that from this one sin, everything else flows. Everything comes out from this one sin. And in reality, it can be stated as the violation of the first commandment. The first commandment says, "You shall have no other gods before me." And that is exactly the sin that we all commit. We put other gods before the true God. Somewhere along the way, we decide to become independent of the true God. Somewhere in our life, we make the choice, or we make the decision that we know better than God knows, and therefore we have been given free will. We have been given the opportunity to have a choice, and unfortunately, we all eventually have made the wrong choice. And so there is God, and then there are all the other gods, little g, in the world. And somewhere along the line, we've chosen that. And so we're basically all violators of the first commandment, of the 10 commandments. We have placed other gods before the true God. So it may be the God of money, the God of greed. It may be the God of career, the God of popularity, the God of success. It may be that we've actually worshiped other gods, certainly in the days of the Old Testament personalities that we read about. That was the greatest problem in Israel. They kept worshiping the wrong gods, the gods of the nations around them, and there were many, and they had many choices to pick from. And for some reason, for whatever reason, and for some reason, we have chosen that. And Jesus put it this way when he said that light has come into the world, but men loved darkness rather than light. And so even when the Lord Jesus came to be the correction for all of this sin and sinfulness, men chose the darkness over the light. And the simple statement is made, the simple matter is here. If Jesus had not come, if Jesus had not died on the cross, we would all still be guilty of these things. Now, I haven't committed every one of these sins listed here, and I would suspect you have not committed all of them either. But we might find the ones that we have committed as opposed to those that maybe somebody else committed. And we also can see in this list, it's not all exclusive. There are other things, other sins that people could commit that are not listed here. It's just a representative thing. But where did it all come from? And it came from the fact that we have chosen, with eyes open, we have chosen against God at some point, and we've chosen to make something else the God of our life. There is competition with the true and living God, and all people have ultimately made a choice for a different God, whatever the name of that God may be. I wish that I had this quote. I have a couple of quotes here I want to throw out at you. And they came from a Swiss theologian in the early 1900s. You may have heard his name. His name is Karl Barth. He wrote a commentary on Romans, and a couple of quotes that I'd like to throw up here that really kind of went along with last week's lesson. And that was our discussion of the wrath of God. So one thing he says is that the wrath of God is to unbelief the discovery of his righteousness, for God is not mocked. Well, what does that mean? What that means is in verse 17 of Romans, it says the righteousness of God is being revealed. Then in verse 18, it says that the wrath of God is being revealed. And sometimes we look at that as that's two different things, but in this connection that Paul is making here, the wrath of God is the righteousness of God. Let me put the next statement up. The wrath of God is the righteousness of God. For apart from and without Christ, God is righteous when he brings forth his wrath. Now, we're so thankful tonight that we don't have to experience the wrath of God as the result of his righteousness. But we would have to experience the wrath of God as a result of his righteousness, because God is righteous, always does the right thing, always does the just thing, and rebellion cannot be tolerated. And therefore, God will extend forth his displeasure toward all unrighteousness. So what Paul is, I think, able to do maybe is captured in this statement, that the righteousness of God is twofold. And that is, without Christ, the righteousness of God is the wrath of God. However, with Christ, the righteousness of God is the power unto salvation. So those three verses, chapter 1, 16, 17, and 18, they all connect in the middle with the concept of the righteousness of God. Wrath towards evil, wrath towards sinfulness, wrath towards ungodliness, salvation towards believers. That's basically the theme. And we're going to spend a whole lot of time just unpacking that theme itself over the next several weeks. So what I've done is I've created a PowerPoint slide that just gives Paul's description of the ungodly as described here in Romans 1. So we'll just kind of go through the list. And you can read through as we go. I think they're in the order in which they appear in the text. I don't have verses next to them. But what do the ungodly do? Well, the ungodly hold back the truth. The ungodly, if they know the truth, they intentionally hold it back. But most of the ungodly live in ignorance, and they hold the truth back. but they may hold it back because of ignorance or blinded. They've been blinded, as Paul would say elsewhere, they've been blinded by the God of this age, by the one who is the deceiver. But truth cannot advance. Truth cannot go forward among the ungodly, because if it did, they wouldn't be ungodly. They would come to the Lord and they would find the power of salvation that has been promised to them. It also says that they know God. They know God, but they do not give him glory or give thanks. I've thought about this a lot, and I think that I could be wrong, but I think deep down inside, every atheist still wonders if there's a God. I'm not sure how a person can be a true atheist. They say they are, and they would argue their point. But if we could dig deep within them, they've got to have some doubt. They would have to have some fear. And the reason is, and Paul makes it pretty clear in this text, he says that they know the things about God because God has revealed it to them through his creation. When we look at the creation around us, the things that God has made, and we simply say all of this was an accident. All of this just seemed to have come about as the result of helium and electrons and protons and heat, and everything just kind of came together at the same time, made some big explosion, and all of a sudden, over a period of millions and millions and millions of years, the world that we live in evolved into what we see in front of us. And, you know, that's just so far-fetched, and yet rational thinking people believe that. And because they can't seem to bring themselves to believe in a creator, a designer, someone who actually intended for this world to come out the way that it has. I'm not going to go into all the details of the creation of this world. You know it as well as I do. The human body, the heavenly bodies, the fact that light conquers darkness, the sun that gives life to this planet, and without it we could not exist, happens to be exactly the right distance away. Just fortunate by fate, the sun just happens to be the right distance away, so that we don't burn up and we don't freeze to death. All of these things cannot be. There are too many coincidences for there to be coincidence. And so Paul says, if you just open up your eyes and look at the world around you, you'd have to know there's a God. You would have to know that there's a designer, and you would have to know that he is a God who cares about his creation, who brought about exactly what he wanted, and he expects then for his creation to honor him and to give him thanks. So they know God, but they do not give him glory. They do not give him thanks. It is an intentional rebellion. They are futile, it says, in their thinking, and they're darkened in their understanding. There is no time in my life that I can remember where the thinking of mankind is more futile than it is today in trying to prove things that are not provable. That there are more than two genders, for example. That I don't understand how rational thinking people can do that. But this is what happens when you leave God. Your thinking becomes futile. And when you leave the light, then there's only darkness left. And so many people are living in the darkness, and they're living in the moral darkness, but they're also living in mental darkness. Their understanding is confused, and they're trying to prove things that are actually absurd. And it goes on to talk about that as well. They claim to be wise, but in reality, they're only showing themselves to be fools. Again, this is not just what's going on today. It's certainly going on today, but it's been going on forever, as long as creation has been here. Thinking that their actions were the result of their own intelligence and their own ability to reason, claiming to be wise, but in reality, their wisdom is only foolishness. This is the paradox of life, the paradox of our world. And if you've tried to convince people who think they're wise but are not, it's very difficult to do, because they're set in their ways, they're set in their mental concepts and their worldviews. But it's only foolishness. Somehow we pray then that the Holy Spirit would make people more aware of the foolishness of their choices, and then lead them and bring them into the ways of wisdom and the way of life. Also, they exchange the glory of God, and I put here, they exchange the glory of God for no gods. I love the analogy that Karl Barth gives in his commentary, where he calls anything that's not Jehovah God is a no God. In fact, he just gives it the name, no God. But Paul says that we exchange the glory of God for images of man, of beast, of whatever. And so the idols that were created throughout all of ancient history, and then idols that are even being created today in some ways, whether they're still being made out of stone or wood, or whether they are idols of conceptual idols, such as money, worship of money, the worship of pleasure, the worship of success. All of these are false gods. And we see people who have exchanged, have sold their souls for these no gods, instead of worshiping and giving glory to the true God. And this is the picture Paul is painting. He painted this way back in the 1st century AD, and now we're over almost, we're 2,000 years later, and people are still worshiping no gods as if they are the true God. They exchange the truth of God for a lie, and so they're gullible and they're willing to believe something that's not even true, as we've already addressed, and we've already pointed that out, and how people are even doing that today. They believe a lie, and there just seems to be, in some ways, no way to convince them of anything else. And they've exchanged the truth of God. So you go all the way back up to the first one. It says they hold back the truth. The issue going on here is that the truth is being assaulted. When truth is assaulted, and lies and deception and ignorance become the thing that people are being drawn to, then there's no way for them to know who the true God is. And so we're being sold a bill of goods. We're being sold the deception that these are the ways in which a person should live. This is what brings you happiness. This is what brings you joy. Having more money, having more things, having bigger houses. These are the things. That's just a few examples. These are the things that will bring you happiness, and it's nothing more than a lie. And in receiving and accepting the lies, we have sold out the truth of God. They worship the created things rather than the one who created them. This is really sad. When you just stop to process that, you worship what was created. That is, you worship the trees, you worship the birds. If you look through ancient history, you see that all of the gods had a earthly counterpart of some kind. So they worship the sun god, or they worship the moon god, or they worshipped a god who looked like a half goat or something. And all of these are created things. And this again, once you accept the lie, once you accept the deception, you don't see the foolishness and the fallacy of worshiping something that's been created. Some worship humans. Well, they're still only created. And if in the days of the Roman Empire, for example, they worshiped the Caesar. Well, but the Caesar didn't live forever. He eventually died and another one took his place, and yet they kept on worshiping men as if they were gods. And they were not. They were nothing more than men, the same as everybody else. We should worship the Creator. We should worship the one who made these created things, not the created things themselves. They exchanged the natural for the unnatural. And this is that discussion where it talks about women and women having relationships with each other, and men with men having relationships with each other in a sexual manner. And so we are seeing the fruit of this untruth play out before our very eyes, even yet today, as this is a very major role in it. And the very last verse of Romans chapter 1 says they not only practiced these things, but they gave their consent to those who were practicing. So the people who are not necessarily engaged in a homosexual lifestyle, but they consent to those who do. Without taking a stand. Now, I know this could be a very controversial topic, but I just try to teach the Bible, and that's what it says, the way I read it. They exchange what is natural, the natural relationship between a man and a woman. They exchange that for that which is unnatural. Of course, their sin, again, if we trace it back, it's all traced back to the fact that we have chosen our own independence. We have chosen to become independent from God rather than loyal to our Creator. We have rejected Him. And once you reject the only God, true and living God that exists, once we reject that God, then our lifestyle can become anything. And these are just signs of the true problem, which is we have chosen our own independence. We've chosen to go our way. We've chosen to believe that we are smarter and we know more about the world and about life than the one who created all of this. Once that happens, then our path could go 1,000 different directions, but they would all be in the wrong direction. They do not acknowledge God. So this again is what I've been trying to say through this whole lesson. There's no acknowledgement, there's no knowledge of God, and there is no acknowledgement of God as being God, to which we owe our loyalty and allegiance. And then we have this long list of things at the end of chapter 1. I'm not going to go through all of those, but we're filled with all manner of evil. And the list is there, but it's certainly not an all-exclusive list. There are many other things that could also be added to that. So as I said just a moment ago, not only do we consent to people to do this ourselves, but we approve of the evil that we see in others. No one is called into accountability. No one is confronted or held accountable for their poor choices, because we're all in the same boat. When we leave God, we are all walking in the wrong path. And so we give agreement to others who are doing it as well. And then going back to the kind of the beginning of the verses we read, because of all of this, they have no excuse. There is no excuse for living this way. God has revealed himself sufficiently in the things that he has made that we all have the same opportunity. We all have the same revelation. We look at the world and we say, this just is the fatalistic result of atoms and molecules all happen to come together at some point in history, millions of years ago. And what we have today is the result of that. That to me is well, let's put it this way. I'll put it this way. We are criticized because we believe in God by faith. But the point is, they believe in their no God by faith as well. Their faith is in no God. And our faith is in God. Both of us have made the choice by faith, because they cannot prove there is no God. I cannot prove there is one. Not 100%. I cannot prove that. None of us can prove there is a God. They cannot prove there is no God. So our choices are by faith. And whichever God we have chosen by faith. But Paul says there is sufficient reason, there is sufficient information, there is sufficient understanding. Well, also, when we get to chapter 2, we'll see this, because it will say that the Gentiles do things by nature. It is, in other words, they have been born with something. The Gentiles have been born with something within them that tells them what's right or wrong. It tells them that there is a God. So it's not just simply looking around and seeing the creation, but it's also looking inside of ourselves and realizing that there are rules and standards. There is good and evil. Where did all of that come from? Well, we were born with it. And where did that come from? Well, we were born with it because God put it there. There is no excuse, Paul is saying, for not believing in God. So, 3 times in this text, it says that God gave them up, or God gave them over. God gave them over to their perverted desires. God gave them over to their perverted passions. And God gave them over to their perverted minds. And when you look at those 3 things, I mean, why would he say that 3 times? It's kind of the same point. Just use different words, but in reality, all 3 of them are very similar. And that is that our thinking, our emotions, our desires, they're all perverted. And they're perverted because we have chosen to rebel against the true God, and we're left with nothing but darkness. We're left with nothing. There's no light. Where there is no true God, there is no true light. And so we're left with lives that are lived out in darkness. So our thinking is dark. Our passions are perverted. Our desires are perverted. No wonder people live the way they live. No wonder they make the choices that they make, because they're in darkness. And they make it up as they go. What happens to appeal to a certain person, then that's what they choose. And the rest of the people go along with it, because we should give people the freedom to pick what they want for themselves. And that's true. We do that. But that doesn't mean that they're choosing right, that they're choosing goodness, that they're choosing the way that will bring life and health and peace and joy to them. It's all about perversion. But notice the key word 3 times, the key concept is that God gave them up to these things. In other words, in my words, I will say, okay, you've chosen to go that way. God says, okay, I'll let you go. He doesn't try to stop you. He doesn't try to stop us. He could, he could zap us. He could say, well, if you're not going to do it my way, I'm going to strike you dead on the spot, and strike us dead on the spot. But he doesn't do that. He hasn't done that. He just says, you want to make those choices? What I'm going to do is give you up and give you over to the consequences of those choices. And you'll learn, someday you will learn, through the consequences of those bad choices, you will learn that you made the wrong choice. It will come to you in some way. And I think this is one of the ways in which God brings about discipline to each of us. And that is, he lets us go our own way so we can learn why we should not have chosen that. How we will have to deal with the consequences of these bad choices. He lets us go. It's like the father in the prodigal son story. The son wanted his inheritance, and the father just simply gave it to him and let him go. He didn't try to say no. He didn't try to stop him. I think inherent in that story is that the father knew that eventually the son would come to his senses, but he had to live it out. He had to live out his life in the darkness in order to someday want to choose to come home to the light. And so I want to, in some way, look at this in a positive way, is that God doesn't just give you up. It doesn't say God gave him up. It basically says God gave him up to their choices. He let them make their choices, and then he let them live out their consequences. But that doesn't mean that forever God gives them up, because that's the whole story of Romans. Even though we are all sinners and fallen short of the glory of God, now it's time to come home. Now the gospel, you might want to listen to the truth of the gospel. You might want to listen to the good news. You might be open to now laying those things aside when you see how evil the world turns out, and how evil, even in your own life, these consequences will work themselves out. I think it's a blessing in some ways for God to leave us alone and let us learn the hard way. I think that's what we teach our children sometimes. Sometimes you just have to learn life the hard way, and God is willing to let that happen to us as well. So a couple of things in summary tonight, just from these verses. First of all, I said there are 2 objects of faith, and everybody in existence worships one of these 2, and worships one of these 2 by faith. They either worship the true God, or they worship some form of the no God, and think that that's God, or they think that that is the right way. But they will accept that by faith, as well as we accept the presence of God by faith. But the difference is, I can see God in creation. I see the hand of a designer. I see the hand of a planner. I see the hand of a master craftsman who did not just create things haphazardly. Everything has its place, and everything works together. I mean, the very fact that trees give off, plant life gives off carbon dioxide, gives off oxygen, requires carbon dioxide. Humans require oxygen and give off carbon dioxide. So we feed the plants by our exhale. They feed us the oxygen we need to inhale. That's just, that in and of itself is an amazing thing. And it shows the the work of a craftsman, of a handy man who has created the world to function together in harmony with one another. The no God is selfish and self-centered and rebellious. But we have the choice. God allows us to make the choice. Second, the wrath of God is justified. The wrath of God against ungodliness is an act of his righteousness. I'll restate that. The wrath of God against unrighteousness shows and proves the righteousness of God. And so his wrath is justified. That is his displeasure against sin and against those who are sinners. It's justified. We cannot throw up our hands at God and yell in anger against him for doing what is the right thing. And the right thing is for him to take a stand against everything that takes a stand against him. If we're willing to take the stand against him, then we should be prepared for him to take a stand against us. Thirdly, the guilt of man is without defense. That is really what it means when it says he is without excuse. The literal Greek word there is he has no defense. I have no basis. When I choose the no God, the no gods of this world, when I choose that, I have no defense because I have at my disposal all of the things necessary to make the right choice. I can make the right choice, but I choose to make the wrong choice. And therefore, I have no excuse. I cannot stand before God and say, yeah, Lord, but you didn't. No, he did. You know, he did. He did everything. And when the cross is preached and we see that the man of God, the Son of God, hanging on a cross for the world, we come to understand that we have no defense for choosing against God. We have no. When we see love, when we see the amazing love that was displayed on the cross. So not only now do we have the creation around us, not only now do we have our conscience and what we feel inside of us to be right or wrong, but now we can look at love, a love that is so undeniable. The story of Jesus is the story of love. We have no defense. That is Paul's argument. Next, man is released to the consequences of his own choices. So, yes, God's willing to let us go through the school, the training ground of consequences. They will not be pleasant. They will not be good. They will not ultimately be a blessing. Even the richest people who've ever lived approach their own death with fear and uncertainty. They know they can't take any of that with them. They've lived in selfishness. They've lived in pleasure all of their life. And yet now they're about to face the darkness of their own demise, their own death, the own consequence of their own choices. And they can't take any of that with them. And they have no clue what awaits them. And many and most live in fear, great fear, as they approach that. The sad part about it is many Christians approach that with fear as well. And we've talked about this many times. Choosing God, there's no fear, should be no fear. For if God is for us, who can be against us? But those who don't have God, they should fear. They should fear, and they have no excuse. We're all guilty. That's what Paul's going to conclude here in the middle of chapter 3, as we've already looked at tonight. For all have sinned, all have come short of the glory of God. And that would be it. That would be all Paul could write, except that Jesus changed all of that. Jesus has changed all of that with the gospel. So since we are all guilty, then we all need the gospel. That is going to be the argument of Romans. So for the next several weeks, we're going to deal with the guilty part. It's not going to be pleasant. That's why I ran through a lot of it in one lesson. I didn't want to just, I could have taken 3, 4, 5 lessons on these verses, but I just didn't want to. I don't want to spend that much time on the negative part, but I do want to call attention to it. And I certainly do want to teach what's there, the truth of what's there, because the only way we can appreciate the gospel is to also appreciate how guilty we are without it. That's why we love it, and that's why we give ourselves more completely to it. So there is the lesson for tonight. And we did cover the rest of chapter 1. We'll look at chapter 2 next week. So chapter 1 deals primarily with the world in general. But bear in mind that as we go into chapter 2, he's going to be dealing more with his Jewish audience, because the Jewish audience thinks that they get a special pass because they're Jews. And Paul is going to say to them, no, you don't get a special pass because you're just as guilty as the rest of the world. And so we'll read that into chapter 2. Have a good week this week. Hope everything goes well for you. And keep all of our prayer requests in mind as you pray this week. Thank you.